Hey, it's Tim here. In today's video, I'm doing something slightly different. I'm starting something new on Fridays. I'm basically going to be sharing my thoughts on any topic pretty much that comes up in the questions in the comments or something that I come across quite often, but it's not really a tutorial and it's not really something that I can show you. It's just something I can talk about. So every Friday, I'm going to be talking about something. In today's video, I thought I'd talk about something I do a lot of, which is keeping in touch with what's new in Tableau. Now, I actually gave a much sort of longer version of this in the Tucson user group. Go ahead and check that video out. It's available on Tableau's own YouTube channel, and you can see basically some sort of pretext to what I was talking about, which was when you approach new releases, you really have to sort of step back away from the product and almost step away from the product excitement and just evaluate what's been released in a more pragmatic way. And so in this video, what I wanted to do is highlight how I do that and how I go through that process. Then at the very end, I'm going to try and sort of break down a product release as such to sort of show you how you should look at these things and maybe how you can make better judgments about whether the features that are being released are actually good for you, your organization, or for the group of users that you look after. So sorry for the long intro. Let's get stuck in. Okay, so I've got something up on screen, which is just something I prepared for the Tucson user group. And it's essentially a list of all the places that I go to find out about what's new in Tableau. And so I'm just going to go through each of them one by one. And I'm going to sort of talk about the value of each one. Now, note the subheading here, which is that the information that's available about what's new in Tableau is available in lots of places, but in no two places will you find the same thing, because in each place something different is being communicated. And that's why you've really got to sort of cover your bases and look at all these places, because sometimes it's the details that really count with these releases and they're not always in one place. So let's first start up with the beta process. So the beta process is an important part of software development. Essentially, a couple of months, maybe 2 to 3 months before the actual release, Tableau make available what they're planning to go live with. And essentially it's being made available so that you can use it, you can test it, you can make sure that it does what it's supposed to do, but most importantly, you're also helping them find bugs. So they often ask for feedback and they often ask you to use the product in a particular way, or they just tell you to use it as much as you want on real data so you can figure out how it works. Now, words of caution here, you should never use a beta on production software or hardware. It's essentially supposed to be used on development software. So a lot of organizations should have a development version of Tableau running, whether it's a dev version of Tableau server or a dev version of Tableau desktop. And the reason you test these things is to find out sort of any quirks that might happen when you deploy it across thousands of people in an automated way. So it's actually a good thing to be part of. And what you get to find out is essentially how the features work. With each beta pre-release, there's obviously some documentation telling you what's new, how it works, and there's also documentation that's going to help people use it. So if there's any issues with that documentation, this also gets pulled up during this process. Now, the thing I really value the most about the beta process is the fact that developers actually feed into this. So you actually get a more, I think, honest perspective of what product marketers and product devs were actually intending this feature to be used for. There's this thing in the Tableau community where a feature comes out and we don't use it how it's supposed to be used. And this kind of behavior comes out right through in the beta. So you can sort of talk to the developers, see how they're thinking you should use it, and then see anything that sort of comes up that you could also use it for, but wasn't necessarily in their trail of mind. So that's the beta process in a nutshell. At the end of the beta process, typically the software comes out and boom, voila, we have the release. You can get involved with the beta process. It's really super easy. I'll put a link up on the screen now, or I'll put a link in the description so you can dive in. But that's pretty much the beta process. You get to find out about stuff before it comes live. Now, there is an NDA, of course, which is why people don't often talk about these things widely. But in most recent years, actually people have sort of just been talking about the features anyway. So that's been an interesting trend. So the kind of release, kind of has a little less excitement because essentially things come out a little bit earlier than they're supposed to. But that's not a bad thing. I guess we need to learn what these features are going to be used for, and the community really sort of go all out and find out what's good and what's not. Okay, the next place you can find out about what's new in Tableau is the product marketing blog. Now, the product marketing blog is just a Tableau blog essentially, but in essence, this is where Tableau really sort of gets into its sort of prose and voice. This is where Tableau really talks to you in the way that they want you to perceive the product. And this is sort of important in two ways, because this is also the stuff that gets picked up by product reviews. It's also the stuff that gets picked up by, people like Gartner, who really evaluate what's new with the product. And this is the stuff that tends to go the furthest, because when Tableau say there's something new, the press engine gets going, the marketing engine gets going. And because of that, you really want to lead with your best foot. So what the product marketing team tend to do is they pick the best products to sort of go out with. And that doesn't necessarily mean Tableau Desktop or Tableau Prep. It just essentially means, look, which features are going to, really gain people's attention and really sort of catch fire and move forward. And so it's always interesting, because you can really see when product marketing sort of gets that wrong, because they'll obviously champion a feature for one thing and then it gets picked up and used for something completely different. And because we have the beta process and we also have the release, what also happens sometimes is that there's a little bit of a lag between when the feature is released and then when the community figures out how to use it to do incredible things. And so there's this sort of 2-month window where a feature can sort of get multiple moments of airtime, because it comes out, people like it, it's great, and then a few days later someone has figured out something great, and then a few more days later things just sort of go wild. So it's definitely something to be aware of. The product marketing blog is a good place to go, but it's often a perspective that's coming from Tableau, from a marketing perspective. So if you're a user of Tableau, you just want to get to the point, it doesn't tend to have all the detail of what's new. And so for that, we actually go to the official product release page, which is the next thing I'm going to talk about. Okay, so the official product release page is by far the most thorough. I'll actually put some sort of clips of it in front of the screen right now. The reason it's thorough is because it actually has very clearly spelled out each of the key features that are being released. Now, this has obviously been cleansed by the product marketing team, and they're sort of encapsulated. So you'll tend to find they sometimes group features. So they might group all the web authoring related stuff in one release. They might group all the features related around a particular aspect. For example, in the most recent release, they put all the Ask Data capabilities in 2 brackets, Ask Data for viewers and Ask Data enhancements in 1 bracket. And then we had Ask Data lenses in a separate bracket. The reason being is that sort of 2 distinct things. The enhancements can kind of go with the new capabilities for viewers, but the Ask Data lenses, which are entirely new, needed their own space. And so you can kind of get this separation of features where it's actually one big feature, but it's been split up in sort of digestible chunks, which makes total sense. But you've also got to look out for that, because you might hear that, hey, this is new, but actually when you drill into it, there's several things that are new in there. The other thing to watch out for is that this also captures a lot of the things that are really hard to talk about, things like new data connectors. And those are the kind of things you can scan very quickly. And if you use that connector, great, off to the races and you're pretty much good to go. However, there are also a lot of things in there that aren't necessarily relevant. So you do have to filter this list out a little bit and work with it as much as you can. What I tend to do is break it down into the 3 different users. So are you a creator, are you a viewer, or are you an explorer? And I've done it in that order because those to me are the most meaningful that's the most meaningful order. So the creator is someone who builds stuff for people to use. The viewer is the largest group of those people who use that content. And the explorer is sort of this middle house. So really the explorer and the viewer are the key items and the key people that are using content and making content. And the explorers are sort of viewers on their way to greatness, I tend to call them. So explorers tend to have a little bit more flexibility to do more things. They've been given a little bit more trust to manage content, but they're not quite there yet in terms of licensing. So they don't have the ability to create a lot of content. But I'm pretty much sure that in the future, this is going to change, and it's going to change sort of the dynamic of how the product works. But nevertheless, the official product release page is great. One of the best places to go, and I highly encourage you go there first after each release. If you're already in the beta process, you'll already know most of the things in that page. But interestingly, sometimes there's stuff in there that hasn't been in the beta as well. So you don't actually know what's in the release until it's on this page. So this is how we know what's what. There is also a sort of rogue version of this called the coming soon page, which is essentially the same page but before the release. So before the release it's called coming soon, and it's essentially what's been talked about in the beta process, and then after the release it's the actual release page with the final set of features. Features come in and out all the time, so you could even find that something gets launched on day one and then it gets pulled because there's a bug, there's a security feature that's sort of not up to scratch. So when you go to this list, don't worry if something appears and then disappears. It's just sort of the flow of software design. Sometimes things go wrong, you need to fix it, and things have to sort of be reevaluated for the next release. New in the most recent versions of Tableau is a summary video. So the summary video is actually quite nice because what it is essentially another video that's been put out by Tableau this time, summarizing everything that's new. Now, unfortunately, it's not necessarily a video showing you how things work, it's just telling you what's new. So it's very short, 6 minutes, really cool. I'd like to think they've started doing this more because there's lots of people in the Tableau community making great video content, and so Tableau sort of, you know, trying to put its own voice into that, because of course you want to have some sort of stewardship of the narrative when you release a product. So of course you want to go with your video, and because you know what's in the release, you have the edge there because you can actually make a video telling people what's in the release before it goes out. So that's sort of one notable advantage of Tableau doing that, but it's also a good thing because you have a nice 5-minute video that covers everything. I'll put a link to some of those in the description. I'll put one up on the screen now so you can see what that kind of looks like. But nevertheless, it's a really good video. I highly encourage you to watch it. At this point, you should know everything in the release, but, and there's a big but here, not everything has been covered. So when you go to the individual product help pages, there's always a link that tells you what's new. And this is a really important part because not only does it list what's actually new in this release in more detail than some of the other pages, but it also links to the documentation. And this is where things really start to come online, because often there's a new feature, and if you just look at the interface, you don't have any call outs telling you what's new. And so this is actually really good because it tells you how to use the new features. So the product help pages and documentation by Tableau is really good. You should always check it out. But when something's new, this is the first place I tend to go to actually find out how to use it. And Tableau is really good at highlighting quirks because there's a lot of consideration that goes into how these things work. So all of that is captured in the documentation, and often you can sort of very quickly understand how something's going to work just by reading that without even touching them. So if you not necessarily have time to open up Tableau and try things, this is a sort of nice alternative. You can go to the documentation, skim read it, and you're pretty much there. Of course, you can also wait until, you know, someone makes a video about the feature, like I sometimes do, but nonetheless, the documentation should be really your first port of call. That's the absolute sort of a gospel of what's new, and it pretty much tells you exactly how everything works. That's where I get my information from, and so it's the first-hand source of information. Now, the remaining ones are probably the most undervalued part of this process. When I say that, I just mean that people don't really appreciate how much comes from these remaining sources, okay? So the first one is the Tableau community. Now, of course, everyone appreciates that a lot of the new things are shared and communicated by the Tableau community. But the key thing here is we all do it at different paces in different places, and we all appreciate completely different things. And it's just impossible to capture all of that in one place. So for this one, you really actually have to work hard to listen to what people are saying about the new features. And sometimes it takes, you know, I've seen features be completely ripped open by people in the community 2 to 3 months after the release, because you've worked on a project and you found some sort of weird use case that something's been enabled and suddenly you're off to the races. The other thing is that sometimes features get staged. So if we take relationships, for example, they came out in version 1, and the subsequent versions have sort of improved in a big way, to the point where some of the things we were complaining about in the first part aren't really issues now in the 3rd or 4th iteration of relationships. And so the thing here to bear in mind is when something comes out, it doesn't mean that's the end. It doesn't mean the Tableau's done. You've actually got to sort of stay in tune with the feature, especially if it's something that's going to help you. You've got to stay in tune with the feature over probably 6 to 7 releases, and 6 to 7 releases means 6 to 7 quarters, which kind of means you'll really need to dial in for about 2 years when something completely new comes out. A good example, explain data and ask data. Since those have come out, we've had something about them in virtually every release. So if I did a video 2 years ago about ask data, it's by no means relevant anymore because the product has changed so much and they've added so many new features that it's moved on miles. And the most recent release made it available for viewers. So now even the licensing has changed. So that's something you just got to be aware of to stay in touch with, what's changing with Tableau. The last one is still underrated. That is using it yourself. I'm the kind of person who likes to, I read the documentation. I rarely actually intend to. I read the documentation because I'm trying to find out how to get at the thing I want to get at. So when you use a product yourself, you actually discover the nuances that really sort of make it work for you and also can sometimes break it for you, if that makes sense. So sometimes you have this expectation that something's going to work one way and it works a slightly different way. And if you wait until you need that feature, that's when you're going to get disappointed the most. So if you use the feature up front and maybe you use it like, in the beta process, you can actually feed back into the product development and make it a better feature for when it's released. And so using it yourself, although is sort of far down this list, I think is one of the most important ones, because until you've used it, you don't really know how to use something. You don't really know how to show someone else how to use it. And one of my colleagues has always said, look, the best way that you know whether you know something is how well you can teach it to someone else. And essentially only by using it will you be able to do that. So that's sort of a really good measure for how well you understand the feature, and just make sure that that's something that you put aside time to do. It does take time. You'll never use all the features. I don't do videos on all the features. I don't get time to touch every single feature. It's virtually impossible. 5 years ago, that was possible. Today, that's just not possible anymore. So you have to choose wisely what you spend time with, and you just have to go with the flow. The very last page is the known issues page. Now, no one likes to talk about problems, but sometimes in a release, they are bugs. And bugs can really ruin your day if you're not aware that they exist. I've had this a couple of times. There was a really weird quirk back in, I think it was 2019.4 or something, some really old version. Anyway, where aggregations in a very specific instance weren't working correctly. And I just happened to be building something right in the sweet spot for that particular instance. And I spent 3 days trying to understand what was going wrong. And it wasn't like 3 straight days. It was just sort of 3 days of revisiting it, trying to fix it, trying to do something else, trying to fix it, not working. And then I suddenly just thought, wait, is this a bug? And so what I did is I went to the known issues page, and there it was, a bug. Now, just think how much time I would have saved if I went there straight out, if I went there right at the beginning. So the known issues page is a good place to go and check if things are working the way they're intended. And often after a brand new release, that is actually when there's the most issues. So if you take the most recent release, 2021.2, the first release of that 2021.2 release will have bugs. It's just inevitable. There's some things that don't get caught when you're building software. It's funny because people always say, well, did they never test it? Well, here's some maths for you. Let's say you have 100,000 beta testers. Let's say you're Apple, you have 100,000 beta testers, and you give them access to your operating system. That's great. When you test it with 100,000 people, you see this problem, but it turns up in 0.001% of users, right? And it's 100,000 users. So that's roughly one person that out of 100,000 people that had this problem. So in your parlance, that's not a bug. That's just a weird quirk related to one person. And you're not going to chase it down because you don't know whether it's the user, the device, the quirk, the environment they're in. It's just not worth chasing time for that one bug. Now, imagine you then roll out the software to 1 billion people. Suddenly, the 0.01% is actually a meaningful number of people. And now you've actually got to start paying attention to these bugs. And that's sort of what happens here with software development. Of course, Tableau do their best to make everything work, but you just can't catch everything. And so there are actually subsequent releases of Tableau for each version that pretty much go on, and Tableau actually do communicate when they stop supporting a specific version and a specific release. So that's something to be aware of. Now, as we move into the browser world, that's going to happen less and less, because as everything moves to the browser, Tableau will always be up to date. Essentially, the browser version will be getting hot fixes, I assume, almost weekly and daily as they see the issues coming in. So whilst it's a pretty sort of old way to think about it with software installations, going forward, you should see this have less and less significance, i.e. you shouldn't have to go to the known issues page because a lot of the issues will be ironed out as people start to use it almost in real time. Okay. So that's pretty much all the places to find out about what's new in Tableau. I'm sure I haven't got all of them. If you've got one that you know about that I've just forgotten to miss out of this list, then let me know in the comments below. I'd love to know your thoughts. Now, before I go, I just want to do one last thing, which is to talk about how you should look at the features when they're released. And I've got this little slide here. Let me go to this next page here, which is where are Tableau features heading? And this is always an interesting question I ask every single time. And if you don't pay attention to it, you'll actually sort of miss the signals that Tableau sort of give you at conference. You'll miss the signals that Tableau give you in lots and lots of different places. And the questions I tend to ask is, right at the top of this page, where is Tableau heading? The next one is, what role will Salesforce play in that direction? Now, the reason this is a specific question at the moment is because the Salesforce acquisition closed roughly 1.5 years, 2 years ago. And when these acquisitions close, especially at the scale that they're at, it takes time for the influence of the parent company to sort of trickle through into the company that's acquired. So you'll see that in sort of small ways initially, then you start to see it in big ways. And so far, I think we've only seen it in small ways in terms of product features and the way the product works. I think what's going to happen in the future, we're going to start to see it in big ways. And that is an important dynamic because for the community that's mostly just been on its own, looking after itself, and the Tableau community, that is, we're going to have to start to integrate ourselves with the Salesforce community a lot more because we won't just be a product on our own. We'll actually have to integrate with other products, especially some of the Salesforce 360 capabilities. And so, that's going to happen one of two ways. Either Salesforce users are going to come to Tableau or Tableau users are going to go to Salesforce. But whatever happens, it's going to have to happen on both sides. And so seeing that interplay when it comes to features and how things are working is going to be a really important dynamic. Okay. And the last thing is, what does the history of feature releases tell us? I've already touched on this a little bit throughout the talk. But when I look at a feature, I always go back and I look at like previous features to see, okay, how are they going to start to roll this out? And that gives you a hint of where things are going. And so one of the nice things with the new release, for example, is the explain data and ask data. Now, they use up a really interesting part of the interface that's sort of been added on, and it started coming with metrics. So with metrics, when you click to enable a metric on server, you get a panel on the right hand side. And that was really interesting because that panel on the right hand side has never really existed. And with explain data, Tableau is starting to use that panel on the right hand side a little bit more. And this right hand side is just sort of a small thing. It's becoming more and more sort of featureful. But as they add more stuff to the product, you have to start to spread aspects of the software across the screen. And these sort of panels, especially this one on the right hand side, seems to me like it's going to be an assistive panel. It's going to be primarily designed for people who are using the visualization rather than people who are building the visualization. And so that's just something, a small thing to sort of look at and an example of how things work. But nevertheless, I think it's really, really cool to sort of just try and sort of look ahead and see where things are heading and how things could end up with the features. Now, a very, very final thing is the Tableau blueprint. And the reason I bring this up is not because this is a video about Tableau blueprint, but essentially, when you think about features, each of the features that Tableau releases tends to answer a question that intersects with some part of this flow. Okay. And something we've seen in the last few years is Tableau really ramping up the elements of the product that capitalize on things like the community and government. Not government, governance. And so this is really interesting. And this is actually really important because if a feature that you're thinking of that Tableau should build doesn't really sit nicely on one of these intersections or multiple of these intersections, then in my view, you're really going to struggle to get that, feature on a plate, because if you look at this sort of flow backwards, and not necessarily from right to left, but if you just look at the flow and you think about how Tableau perceive it, product devs are going to be trying to answer questions that sit within these pillars. And these pillars are sort of much higher level. They're more strategic about, what are we going to solve this year? How are we going to move things forward over the next 3 years? What's going to be one of the important avenues? And a big avenue that is really apparent that Tableau is tackling is this capability of empowering not just the authors of data visualizations and analytics, but actually the users directly. So giving the users the ability to use visualizations without needing to go back to the authors and ask them to enhance them, giving people, the everyday people, the power to just analyze data naturally without having to open up Excel, without having to do something else. Essentially almost getting rid of this idea of having to build dashboards to get answers to questions, because that takes time. It takes a lot of sort of patience as well. And in some organizations, it's not done well either, even if they have the resource. So that's a really interesting dynamic. And you can kind of see that in Tableau's strategic direction as well. And so these kind of high level sort of strategies do actually influence the bottom end of what comes out of Tableau. So it's really important to sort of stay in tune with that as much as you possibly can. So that's it. This has been a long video. I'm going to end this here. I just wanted to do something very casual, talk to a screen and talk about my thoughts on a particular aspect. So that's been my thoughts on how to stay in touch with new releases in Tableau. Let me know what you'd like me to talk about next week. I've got a couple of ideas. There's one issue that really drives me up the wall, and that is hacks in Tableau. So I might talk about that next week. If you want to know more about that, let me know in the comments. But if there's anything else, this is the time. This is your chance. Every Friday, I'm going to sit and talk to the camera about something. So this is your opportunity to sort of feed into that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you'd like me to talk about. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this, you know what to do. Otherwise, I'll catch you in the next video.